Morning all, a very dramatic day for chess fans yesterday, the final round of the World Championship candidates, round 14, with Kramnik and Carlsen neck and neck going into this round. So let's have a look first at the game Magnus Carlsen against Peter Svidler. e4 from Magnus. After e5, knight f3, knight c6, the Ruy Lopez, classic Ruy Lopez. a6, bishop a4. Now knight f6, Magnus castles, bishop e7, and now the move d3, which avoids, for example, the dreaded Marshall Gambit system. It can occur later. So d3 avoids a lot of the theory, but there's still a lot of theory being generated around d3 itself. b5, bishop b3, d6 supports the e5 pawn, which means now that potentially knight a5 is on the cards. a3 providing a flight square for the bishop. Maybe you might think this is slightly unusual compared to c3, but it seems to meet some of the same goals in being able to address knight a5 here. Black castles, and now knight c3. A nice pressure point is d5 here from white's perspective. Peter plays bishop b7. Now normally one might think, well, the bishop's kind of locked in by this pawn chain. That's true, but this is not totally indestructible. If black can arrange a d5 later, maybe this bishop is going to see light of day on this diagonal, and this could be dangerous for the white king. Okay, that's something to bear in mind here. We see now bishop d2, another move which doesn't look entirely standard, a little bit unusual. So bishop d2, queen d7, and now a4, tempting the black pawn forward, but actually no, we see just the pawn being supported, knight d8, the queen now supporting that pawn, and the bishop's able to recapture as well if rook, if ab and rook takes a8, and we see actually a takes and the exchange of one pair of rooks. Okay, so now knight e2, and this is quite common to see this knight coming here to eye this f5 square. From f5 there are dangerous ideas set up. For example, knight g7, bishop h6, all these resources can start to appear once a knight is on f5. And black also would want a knight on f4. These f5 and f4 squares are basically what Kasparov considers his favourite positions for knights, especially in the Ruy Lopez. And both sides here aiming to establish their aggressive knights like this near the opponent's king. Okay, so knight g3, and now we see the move c5. So this is very interesting. It's putting a lock and key on d4 here, just in case there's a central eruption. And also, of course, if c3 and d4, there's an option of c4 as well, but there's pressure on e4 here from this bishop. So this plan in the centre doesn't look entirely appropriate at the moment to do anything with the central control. Instead we see knight f5, and now this is a pretty dangerous knight, and the bishop actually goes to d8. Now often the bishop would drop back to f8, which actually guards g7 more, so there's some extra dangers than usual in this position with the bishop on d8 rather than f8. We see now c4, locking down against d5, trying to hem this bishop in, keep this wall against this bishop on a8. B takes c4. Okay, and here if d takes, one of the points is knight takes e4, which means actually bishop takes c4 looks forced, which means d5 might be appropriate at some point in the not too distant future. At the moment, of course, there's pressure on e5, but black wants to try and liberate this bishop in particular in this position and open up this diagonal against white's king. We see bishop c7 supporting indirectly e5, so starting to make preparations for playing d5. Rook e1 putting pressure on e5, again kind of prophylaxis against d5. Rook e8, and again there's implications at some point for e5 if this knight moves. Queen c1, and here it starts to look a little bit dangerous for black after this simple battery. Specific resources like bishop h6 are starting to appear here and must have worried Peter Svidler in this position. Okay, so in this position, there is a move though which Peter finds, which is kind of defensive and attacking at the same time. Peter Zwitter plays knight h5. Okay, so kind of adding more support for g7, and also trying to come to f4. For example, if we just rewind just briefly here, White might have been threatening bishop takes e6, knocking out a defense of g7, and then taking, and then bishop h6, and then queen g5. This is the kind of danger facing black potentially in some variations, if this can be made to work. So this knight h5 is both attacking and defending. And Magnus has a difficult position now, a tricky one. And engines were suggesting this undermining the pawn chain here immediately with b4, not worrying about the knight coming to f4. As humans, we do tend to worry with knights around our king. Often it's often terminal to have a knight near the king. I mean, this knight is almost putting black's king safety on the brink. Will this knight do the same for white's king safety? So there's a decision here between b4 and g3 really. b4 would need some very, very careful defence. After that entrenched knight on f4 comes there, maybe bishop retreating. It might be a viable move. I think it was suggested by engines during the stream at Chess Bomb, the Houdini analysis I saw at Chess Bomb. b4 was given as one of the top moves. But this g3, okay, it looks like a very human bit of prophylaxis here, this move g3, just to keep the knight out and hope that black hasn't got d5 at the appropriate time to try and wrest open this diagonal, because now there's extra weaknesses. There is a compromise on the light squares here by playing g3. For the moment, d5 is still not possible though. We see g6, and now things really sharpen up. Check, king g7, and the point now of this is revealed. White plays now knight g5, striking at f7, inviting a discovery check. That would be a disaster, taking that knight. That's immune. Okay, so now Peter just takes on g5. Bishop takes g5. And in this position, it looks exceptionally dangerous with f7 on, as a targeting of f7. But this is blocked by d5 now, trying to liberate this bishop as well. And here it starts to get dangerous across these light squares. It's as if Magnus has played very dangerously for his king safety, basically, fallen victim to d5 at the right time. And I think he's getting short of time in this game as well. This is one of the very few games he's under real pressure with the white pieces, and maybe it's just last round nerves, but he's starting to feel some clock pressure at this point, I believe. So e takes d5, bishop takes d5. Pretty dangerous bishop, just cutting across white's light squares. But maybe Magnus was banking on this next move, knight g4. This is a very clever move in some respects. If queen takes g4, then maybe throw in a check first, but bishop takes d5 is the point to rob black of that light square bishop. Because otherwise now it seems that bishop f6 is a very, very dangerous tactical idea, taking then queen h6 and then mating. So this seems very dangerous. But Peter Zwitter realizes he's not getting mated on g7 here, not with this knight defending that key g7 square. He just calmly plays bishop f3, which means there's a real threat now from both pieces just to take on g4. And also this f7, maybe not such, it's not a problem at the moment, but the test is now bishop f6 check. Okay, the thing is, this doesn't have to be taken, and the knight is taking care of the g7 square, so the black king just cleverly steps back, knowing queen h6 is not threatening anything. The knight is protecting g7. We see now knight h6 check instead of the queen going to h6, king f8. Okay, there's a problem with f7, but on the other hand, the black queen is threatening the menacing queen h3 to get onto g2. Something has to be done about this. So we see the move queen e3, and the bishop just drops back to b7 now. And you might think, well, also the c5 pawn, we really need a second pass check on this position. It's getting a bit hair-raising. What's happening here with this c5 pawn, for example? Is that too dangerous? Maybe bishop d6 seems absolutely forced. But then, maybe then black can take on f6 after, because the knight is attacking that f6 bishop. Things are very hairy right now in this position. The bishop actually drops back. Okay, now queen h3, threatening mate on the spot. And here, I believe, is a key blunder, which we're going to examine in detail in the second pass, basically. Magnus plays f3. I think he's getting into time pressure as well. It's compromising his king safety somewhat. And we see a very strong, very powerful move afforded by what seemed to be an only move earlier, but the king's actually usefully protecting the e8 rook here, and this supports the following resource: knight f4. In some lines it would seem to support that, because not here actually pardon me, because actually there's a battery here, but potentially that's useful. So in this position, knight f4, threatening mate, g takes f4, queen takes h4, and the knight's hanging. Okay, if the rook moves, then that's more relevant that the king's protecting e8. So e takes might be on the cards in some lines. Okay, so here we see knight takes f7, and this queen is eyeing e1 here, so the queen's protecting e1. We see this nice little neat tactic: bishop takes f3. So if queen takes, we have queen takes e1, and the queen is now threatening things like queen g4 now. So we see queen f2 from Magnus, check, and in this position there are two options, and possibly king f1 is much stronger. We see queen g3 here, and now this definitely is a useful implication, this king supporting the rook, because now we see e takes f4. So rook takes e8, the king is able to recapture, and Magnus has drifted into a bad ending. He takes off the queens. Basically, he's a pawn down with black having bishop pair, and these pawns are ready to roll, and Magnus is very, very short on time at the moment. He's down to about his last 5 minutes now. Knight g5 h6, and the pawns are quite easy to roll forward. h5, we see knight h6, bishop d1. See, these bishops can start coordinating to get these pawns going forward. King f2, f3, eyeing h2. That's moved out of the way. But bishop f4, and now the knight could be stranded after knight g8, because bishop g5 would cut out the knight, remember, coming back into the game, as well as threatening bishop h4 to further push this pawn. So this is a really dangerous position now. It's lost. In fact, knight f7, g5, pawns are relentless. King e1 in a bad position, just g4. It doesn't matter about the bishop. The pawns are too strong. Magnus tries hg. He's probably waiting at this time. He's looking to see if the Kramnik game against Ivanchuk. King takes d1. He realizes he's lost. So king e1. He just wants to wait to time his resignation a bit later. g2. The pawns are just unstoppable. King f2, bishop h2, forcing queening. This is a really hairy game, and it's very rare for Magnus to lose with the white pieces. So fantastically played by Pietrzwidla, though. He made the most of his chances. Let's have a look in the second pass at this game, and some of the more technical moments. So let's skip past the opening phase. So queen d7, okay, knight d8, exchange of rooks here. Let's get to a juicy bit. So knight f5. Seems already black might be technically doing okay, even with c4 here from this brief check on this position. Okay, but bishop d8 was played, and now c4 locks down against black playing c4 now. Okay, let's go to the very critical moments coming up. Queen c1. So what is actually the threat behind Queen c1 here? Bishop g5 is on the cards. b3 is just a consolidating move, it's not really a threat. So bishop g5 could be the start of something dangerous. We see knight h5 in this position. And now here is the engine system was actually b4, not weakening the king. And it turned out those king weaknesses were actually critical later. It did put white on a scary bit of ice. But, you know, allowing a knight to be installed on f4 is also pretty dangerous stuff as well. But if we imagine b4 instead of g3, let's go with this as an idea. Allow the knight to be installed. You see, there's an idea of attacking d6 here. I think that's one of the points of playing b4, to make d6 more of an exploitable weakness. But here there's a move bishop d2 just to make sure black hasn't got any naughty stuff happening. For example, if we went all in with queen a3, I think there might start to be some naughty stuff on g2 coming up. So maybe even d5 here first. It just looks, from a human point of view, this is kind of a dangerous thing. In any case, even if the knight's just supporting d5, that's still interesting for black. Okay, so pardon me, he doesn't want this knight coming to f4. Pardon me. So he plays g3, and we see white's knight being kicked. Check, king g7. Technically, it looks as though white's doing okay here. And again, this move b4 is actually prompted here to undermine black's pawn chain. Here, what's the actual difference? If takes, we have a neat tactic here as well. This can't be taken because of knight g5. That looks much better for white. So this looks promising for white, this kind of position. Okay, and what if, okay, something else, instead of c takes b4, try and support this, bishop e3, because white's getting some pressure on that queen side. That's the point of b4, to try and put pressure over on the queen side. But we see knight g5 instead, just playing on the king side only. Knight takes g5, bishop takes. Another move, d5, which seems really sensible and aggressive to open up this bishop on this diagonal, where white has after all weakened light squares. But still, technically at this point, white's doing okay. ed, bishop takes d5, knight g4. Okay. And what is white actually threatening? Bishop f6 and knight takes e5 is the main threat. Bishop f3, and here it seems that white is still technically better. Check. In this position, again, okay, there's nothing wrong, it seems, with knight h6, and there's nothing wrong with queen e3 to fend off, because black was threatening in this position queen h3, terminal, so white has to be able to attack f3. The bishop dropped back, but we're going to come up to a spectacular resource which would change the whole evaluation. The intuitive evaluation will be changed in the position we're about to get soon. So black is now threatening to take this bishop. That's the major thing, as well as queen c6. Queen c6 on the diagonal. Also queen h3 is threatening, but knight f6. So bishop h4. Okay. So you might think, well, what about queen c6 here? That might be answerable by queen e4, as this line shows. But we see queen h3, and here is the critical moment. There's an absolutely stunning resource. Instead of move f3, and this is like I think a key blunder, because black's advantage is quite large and pronounced after f3. And we'll examine in detail why, but the fantastic resource is actually bishop d5, believe it or not, protecting that g2 spectacularly. And we get this variation which Peter Zvidler in the press conference alluded to, calculating a little bit of queen takes d5. Okay, and this is really dangerous for the black king's safety. Now if takes, queen takes f7, double attacking here, rook and bishop. Now there's two lines. Say rook c8. Now in this position, okay, not the howler which Peter Vidler had said in his analysis. Rook c8, I think there's bishop b6 as an absolute crusher, just because the rook's protected and black might be threatening bishop takes f2 in some lines, as well as rook c1. So rook c8, this is bad for white. Rook c3, rook a8. It's just bad for white, this position. So if we go back here, white has two key moves in this position after rook c8. Now bishop e7 threatens. What does bishop e7 threaten? Bishop f8, and that's really dangerous actually for black. So if queen f5, we can take rook c1 as a nasty pin, and white's going to be okay here. White's okay, doing well there with the rook against bishop and knight in this ending scenario. So that's fine. So this is very, very tricky stuff to calculate after bishop d5. But there's another line here. What if the rook didn't move to c8? We see bishop a5 counter-attacking against white's rook. Then we have this line, queen takes e8, bishop takes e1, queen takes e5, and there's a lot of pawns being collected for the piece. If black's best is bishop f2, that's not particularly impressive. Bishop d2, bishop e7, white's not facing too many issues. But bishop takes f2, this is much, much better for the game, than the game at least. White's still got even a slight advantage. It isn't like the end of the world, like the game. So this is an amazing actual defensive resource, kind of pyrotechnic resource here. That instead of f3 there was this bishop d5, which seems to work out in the maze of variations that would ensue. So we see f3, and now this is a very, very powerful move, knight f4. So knight f4, threatening mate. Now if white tries to defend with queen f2, a beautiful tactical idea in this position will be queen takes h4 with the idea of knight h3 check. So taking check, taking here. Now bishop d8. White's pawns are just fragmented and pretty bad here, and the knight is stumbling back. Okay, but you know, for example, like this. But still, black's just better here. No problems for black. So Magnus actually made things worse, though. I believe, even though queen f2 was actually one of the better moves, it's a lesser evil move. Magnus played actually g takes f4, which is the worst option. Yes, it defends the mate, but now queen takes h4, and there's like a double attack here, which means bishop f3 is really on the cards. It's difficult if you're going to move the knight for bishop takes f3, and that's really, really dangerous now. What else is there? What else can white do here? Let's try f5. e4 apparently is very powerful. That unleashes the power of the bishop on h2, and in this position, this is not good. White's crumbling. So this is just too much pressure here. Bishop takes f3, and black's got a really fierce attack going on here. Now threatening queen g4, threatening a mate in 2 of queen g4 and queen g2. Mate in 2 is now threatened. So queen f2 is one of the only moves. Check, queen g3, which it makes things even worse. King f1 was a lesser evil move again, and we could see check. And in this position, e takes f4 with that king protecting the rook. It's not very pleasant for white, but it's not as absolutely terminal as quickly as the game continuation. Black stands better, of course. White's king is very exposed here. It's a very unpleasant position to play, okay. But yeah, the position was made even worse in time pressure. If we go back, queen g3, which just allows black to transition to a crushing endgame, basically, after e takes f4, with the queens coming off, black having the bishop pair, and the pawns just marching forwards quite naturally and easily. It's a technical exercise now to march these pawns forward. So bishop d1, and the bishop error are quite beautiful in coordinating to get this f pawn to a very dangerous position. So attacking h2, I mean it's gone now. It's absolutely gone. This is very, very logical. The passed pawn's absolutely a menace now, absolutely winning. So a fantastic game by Peter Zvidler. So did Magnus's lucky stars abandon him? We'll see in the other games of the round. The critical game was obviously the Kramnik game. So could Kramnik now overtake Magnus Carlsen? So let's look at the next game of the round. Let's briefly touch on Gelfand against Grischuk. Okay, so Boris Gelfand playing white against Grischuk. We see a Grunfeld with this bishop d2. Okay, and a slight advantage for white. Okay, black's undermining white centre a little bit. Bishop g4, now white accepts double pawns. So b5, an interesting move here. b5, locking down against c4, trying to discourage it. b4, dark square strategy from black. Knight e7. Now c4 is able to be played. Queen a6. Discouraging rook d2, because knight d5, there's a kind of pin on f1 here. But it's offering c5. Now knight takes. E takes. Queen a3. And now black's got access to this f3 square, which can try and guarantee a perpetual check. And in fact, the game ended quite swiftly with a perpetual check. Okay, I don't really want to go into too much detail about this game, I think, because I think I want to focus on the other major game of the round. So please excuse my brevity here as we skip along to another game now. So Levon Aronian against Rajabov is very interesting. Let's save the Kramnik game for last on this particular video. So Levon Aronian against Rajabov. d4, and we see another Grunfeld, or is it now? It's no, it's not a Grunfeld, because bishop g7, no d5 from black. So we have a King's Indian, Rajabov playing his King's Indian. h3, okay, Makaganov system, very solid, and it looks like Boris Averbach variation now, transposition. a6, knight f3, c5. White takes on c5, queen a5. So threatening knight takes e4. That's protected. Now d takes c5. White castles. Knight c6. Knight d5. Rajabov plays bishop e6. Queen b3. Now b5. It looks as though black's got an energetic, dynamic position at the moment. Rook ac1. Black takes on c4, takes, offering the e4 pawn, but he's trying for that e7 pawn, because this knight's kind of in the way for e7 of the bishop. So knight takes e4 is played, but instead of knight takes e7 check here, we see actually queen b7 for the moment, just attacking the knight. This is protected, and now not knight takes e7 check in fact, but bishop takes e7. And here I think our engine friends indicate that this next move from black might have been a little bit dodgy. The move bishop takes d5 was played, relinquishing the light square bishop, as well as giving up the exchange here. Okay, so what is going on here? Well, actually it's not giving up the bishop because of rook c7. I think rook c7 might be good. We need to really engine check this actually. So what is actually going on here? Because that looks like a potential disaster. Queen b3. Okay, what is actually going on here? Bishop takes d5. Bishop takes f8. White is temporarily the exchange up. Rook b8. Yes, it's chaos now. White doesn't move the queen. I think that would be absolutely terrible if he moves the queen. He takes on b8, so he's giving up his queen now For what? For a lot of pieces, it seems. Bishop takes d5. After the smoke's cleared here, it's 2 rooks for the queen. Both sides of 2 sets of minor pieces here. Pawn situation about equal. So bishop takes e4, 2 minor pieces each, 2 rooks against the queen. Knight d7, b3 offering the a2 pawn for the moment. Rook cd1. So it looks as though, you know, black is like tempted just to try and make use of his a pawn. Knight e5, check. King e7, rook b8, protecting b3. Another set of minor pieces coming off. The 2 knights come off. Opposite coloured bishops. Bishop d4. Has black got pressure on f2? g3, a5. Why not move the pawn? Okay. Rook e1 check. King f6. Rook e2 check. King g2. The rooks are fighting back. And this next move, I believe, is a clear blunder from Rajabov. On a quick engine inspection of this game, this looks like a clear blunder. a4. I think what's been underestimated here is the fierceness of the pressure on black's king. Black seems completely oblivious now after rook b7 to his king's safety. White is actually threatening though in protecting that rook. White is threatening b takes without that being an issue now, that rook on the b file being pinned. We see black reacting to that kind of threat, but maybe there's another threat which he should have been concerned about. So he plays a3, which is another questionable move, because now bishop d5, and the real threat now is revealed that really his king's safety is not that great. And this pawn is too lustful to become a queen. We see a2, another questionable move. And now the black king really is in bad shape. Rook takes f7 check, king g5 check, king h6, and white's not bothered about the pawn. Doesn't mind black queening, he just plays calmly rook e7. A mating net has been woven, unfortunately, for Rajabov. He can't get out of this mating net. He plays g5, and we just see he plays g5, and we just see the flight square taken away. Bishop e4 threatening again mate. Black has to resign here. Rajabov has gone badly wrong with his a pawn. This must be one of the worst tournaments Rajabov's had in recent years. He's had more losses in this tournament than I think he has in whole years of play, and apparently March is his worst month. So unfortunate for Rajabov, but it meant Levon Aronian as well as Peter Svidler now on 8 points. Magnus Carlsen on 8.5. So we're going to look at this final game in this video, this Kramnik game against Ivanchuk. Ivanchuk against Kramnik, actually. Ivanchuk playing white. But before we do, let's look at some of the trickier moments of this game. Just put those under engine inspection. So could Rajabov have held the balance, really? Did he get overexcited, perhaps? Okay, so b takes. For the moment, it was a complicated position. Now knight takes e4. Maybe rook a b8 is a viable alternative, just kicking the queen. Seems white's got a slight plus though. So he played the sharp knight takes e4, and we saw queen b7, rook a8. And yeah, the way Rajabov's played it, it's like he's equalised here. We see bishop takes e7. Now this is the questionable move. Sorry, not because it's relinquishing the light square bishop, but because there's a better move simply available here. It seems, in this position, black could have played rook e8. And what does white do here? Let's say rook fe1. Now he can take on d5, take on e7. This should be okay for black, it seems. Queen takes a2. It should be okay. There's pressure on b2 here. That's fine. Should be okay. So let's go back. So this bishop takes d5 is slightly questionable. In this position, bishop takes d5. The problem is the rook b8 is not as effectual as before after bishop takes f8. After rook b8, white has this option of simply taking the rook. But there's actually another option, it seems. Queen d7 is interesting as well, but there may be a repetition. So this is white going for the win. He doesn't want a repetition with Queen d7. He just snaps that rook off, and we get an interesting imbalance in the position. Queen for 2 rooks emerge. Well, if black didn't take there, it's not as good, I think. Rook takes c5 is actually crushing. So black has to take on f8, it seems. And okay, the a2 pawn is dropping, but first c5 is supported. It doesn't want an immediate trade of c5 for a2. Protects c5 pawn. Now a2 is dropping because b2 is also loose to that bishop, so he's accepting the loss of the a2 pawn. But white stands a tiny bit better, it seems, from engine point of view here. Now about equal, actually. Maybe there's not too much in it here. Black should have been able to hold the balance, I think. So knight e5, check. It looks about equal here. Opposite coloured bishops as well. g3, a5. But here we start to see the critical blunders emerge in this position after king g2. Here is a critical blunder, a4. It looks as though, well, where is the coordination of these 3 pieces? Where is it? Is it really in evidence? But it's this d5 square for f7 which is key here. So the f7 square is the focal point for white's coordination, and the brilliant thing about it is giving black time to get critical proportions of this a pawn to apparently get close to queening. So rook b7 is now threatening b takes as well, and white's actually much better here already. So a4 there was actually a blunder. Better move, maybe queen d3, and if rook b7, try and do something about this f7, king g7. You see, this queen is tying down against bishop d5, so it's already a bit trickier. Queen f5, just prepared to, get rid of the 2 rooks for the queen, opposite coloured bishops. So it shouldn't have been such a big deal, this position. It should have been able to hold the balance, but no. We see this a4, and after rook b7, white's given time, because it seems as though the threat's b takes, but actually bishop d5 is a major threat for f7, and this rook coordination is getting really dangerous for black's king safety. Already it's absolutely critical, though. It doesn't need inferior moves already. It's like +7. What does black do here? If king g7, we just take now. Rook e7, we've got a similar mating net to the game emerging. It's just winning the queen. It's pretty hopeless, this position. I mean, we can try and do this, but now look, this is mating. Okay, so that's hopeless for black. So black's already he's had it now after bishop d5. Simple lethal coordination of the 2 rooks and bishop. The a pawn was a bit of a distraction for black. I think he can optimistically queen that a pawn. But Rajabov, to be fair, he's really he's had a regressible tournament. I don't think he's in great shape by this round in any case. So he's gone into a mating net. So let's look at the final critical game of the round. Could Vladimir Kramnik catch up Magnus Carlsen? Playing Ivanchuk, who's already lost quite a few games on time in this tournament. In their last encounter, it was a draw in the tournament, in this double round robin. So would it be another draw? Just a draw at this stage would mean Kramnik would edge out Magnus Carlsen. So the problem is, one of the problems, Vladimir Kramnik was looking on all the time at Carlsen's game during this game, to determine should he be playing for a win, for a draw. Confusion sets in. Now confusion is, you're sapping your resources if you're confused. If you've got different goals, you don't know what the goal is. It's sapping resources. They're not going all in the same direction. We see after d4 already a surprise and symptomatic of Kramnik's objective. Is he playing for a win? Is he playing for a draw? He plays the Perk defence. And you might think, well, Perk, yeah, Perk's okay. Not at this level. It's quite a rare bird to play the Perk. Now, the interesting thing from my perspective looking at this game is that Vasily Imachuk plays nothing spectacular, not the Austrian attack. All he does is put the 2 pawns in the centre, plays knight c3 and knight f3. And you might think, this is very, very sedate. Sedate is a very good word for this. What is going on here? Why use this approach? From a psychological angle, this means, compare this to an Austrian attack, it's less dynamic for black. The 2 knights are getting a grip on all the central squares, and it's very, very classical setup. And in fact, I remember a British Championship game which depressed John Spillman quite considerably. He lost very quickly to Nigel Short, playing the black side of a Perk. He later tried to finish out with his Queen's Bishop. But Nigel Short's play was extremely classical like this as well. Bishop g7, bishop e2. It looks so modest. What is going on? I mean, it guards against ideas like bishop g4 and e5 and black trying for the d4 square. So it's kind of built-in prophylaxis. Both sides castle. Now black trying to get a sniff of counterplay by trying to generate some play on the queen side. a6. Now this bishop g4 for any dark square strategy is ruled out here. h3. Just ruling out bishop g4. Such simple, crystal clear setup for white. Seemingly totally unambitious. But how does black actually get from this position a fair share of the centre? Usually black would try for c5 or e5 sometimes. We see knight c6, but bishop g5 is really trying to discourage e5. You know, this nasty pin. Maybe white can just take the queens off and play bishop f6 and knight d5 beyond c7. It looks as though this is totally to discourage e5 now. Black plays now b5. Vladimir Kramnik plays b5. Prophylaxis against b4, a3. Slight weakening of black's kingside to kick the bishop. And it goes just to e3, another perk of h3. There's no harassment possible with knight g4. So this h3 is quite a useful pawn here, although sometimes in different positions it might be a target, but here it's doing a useful job. And it looks as though white might even be threatening now e5, potentially. Black goes for a share of the centre. He commits a pawn, Vladimir commits a pawn with e5. And what we get now is an exceptionally uncomfortable position. D takes e5, D takes e5. We see queen, not a queen exchange, not knight d5 or anything spectacular, just queen c1. Simply putting pressure on h6 and also preparing rook d1. And white's grip on d5, you'll notice, is much stronger than black's grip on d4 here. It's the pressure, it's the initiative which makes the difference, what weaknesses are exploitable or not. White's got a lot more pressure here than black has. And the computers are suggesting that there's a dynamic move available to black, which maybe we'll check in a second pass more, which involves sacrificing a pawn, knight d4. And I actually thought this is the whole point of black's play, to sacrifice this h6 pawn. We might have rook d1 forcing c5 first, and this might get some play for black later on, you can imagine, on the h file. But it's not. It wasn't actually the idea of Vladimir Kramnik to play knight d4 here. Instead, he plays this move king h7, and without the pawn sack, just defending that, you might think, well, he's preparing for bishop c5, rook g8, and is there some aggressive intention with the rook on g8? Something crazy in mind like this? Is there something really aggressive for black with rook g8? Is he somehow playing for a win? But no, we see after bishop c5 the rook going to e8 actually. Rook d1, bishop d7. It looks as though white has all the pressure here. Control on d5, pressure on the d file. And now Vasily just plays b4, which gives the queen a nice square b2. Might be useful to come to this diagonal later as well, to if7. Queen c8, as though h3 is eyed potentially, but queen e3. The queen's not neglecting her majesty here. It's available for knight h2s, for example, to evict any queen on bishop h3. So okay, so at the moment, okay, white has got this huge grip on d4 and grip on d5. These two squares are really gripped tight, and white can potentially look at these two pawns as an underminable target with a4. There's a lot of pressure also on b5 here, and the rook here is ideally placed. If a4 is on the cards, the rook's going to be very useful. We see knight d8, and now indeed white playing a4. So black's queen side is under fire here. White really controls this position quite significantly. B takes, which exposes a6 as the next target. Knight takes a4. But now a pseudo-aggressive move, knight e6. The knight's coming to that f4 square, which would seem so dangerous in the Carlsen-Zwiddler game. A knight coming to f4. Should this worry Vasily Ivanchuk? He can hardly do g3. That he's played h3. He's got too many weak pawns here. Surely he invites that knight to come for dinner. Bishop c4. The other knight swings round for that f4 square. Knight c3. White's also looking at d5 here, and now this a6 pawn potentially. The h knight comes in to f4. Okay, is this getting dangerous for Vasily Ivanchuk? Knight d5. Okay. Bishop b5. Bishop just drops back. Bishop c6. And now rook a5. White can simply just try and gang up now on the a6 pawn. Queen b7. Okay. Now here is some of the real genius of Vasily Ivanchuk being demonstrated. He doesn't have to put up with this knight on f4. It is exerting central pressure as well. You can imagine black might be interested in playing rook d8, just using the knight for that central pressure implication. The knight is kicked at the expense of a pawn here. It's forced into action. It can't take on d5 without black losing a piece. It has to take, it seems, on h3. That's one of the most sensible moves, it seems. King g2, and white's potentially got this h file as well now. Knight hg5, rook h1. Threatening immediately to win a piece. Knight takes and then queen takes. The king steps out of the way. Knight takes anyway. Black's pressure has gone on the king side. So can white play on the queen side still? He's got the bishop. Bishop's like looking at these dangerous diagonals. But at the moment, potentially, there is still some pressure on d5. And if the king moved, then maybe f5 would be on the cards. We see f3 here. Okay. And interestingly, this is quite a difficult knight to tolerate, because actually there's things like knight e7 check all the time as well. It's actually given white the bishop pair now. So for the pawn he's invested, he's got these raking bishops, beautiful raking bishops here. Bishop c4, and there's a potential battery implication. It's left on c4 to support this battery on f7 potentially. Queen c8. And there's no threat, of course, on h3. This knight's relatively harmless at the moment. So queen b3 is afforded now. Okay. We see in this position the move h5. Maybe Kramnik, he's a bit confused whether to go for a draw or try and win this. Maybe knight e6 was more prudent than h5. Bishop e3, knight e6. Rook ha1, just going for that a6 now, leaving black a little bit desperate to get counterplay somewhere. And Vladimir plays h4. Uncharacteristic play from Vladimir Kramnik, just going for a kind of hack attack. He's loosening his position in the process though. This pawn is just snapped off, not worried about knight f4 here. queen d8, and that h4 pawn seems a bit of a concern, one would think. But actually Vasily just takes on a6. He's not bothered about h4 at all. The rook's hanging anyway. And then c6 will be dropping off. We need to look at this in the second pass, taking this pawn. But it seems if the queen hasn't got too many supporters, it's not a big deal. And there's also bishop e6s to factor in. We see rook c8, which is actually, I think, a blunder. We'll see that in detail. That might be a blunder here. Rook h1 supporting h4. Rook c7. And now swapping this bishop for the knight, capturing on e6. And usually that's part of the dark square strategy. It strengthens white's grip on the dark squares because black's dark there square, the defender has been removed. b5, and now even b6 is a problem. This pawn supported here, and if takes we have rook e6, and this is pretty devastating for the check. And then h5, that would be black's position will be crumbling. So unfortunately this is an awful position now for Vladimir Kramnik. Unfortunately for him, fantastic for Magnus Carlsen. It looks to be an awful position. Rook b7, we have a protected passed pawn. c5, setting a little trap. You know, if takes, then queen d2 check looks good. Rook b1, just calmly defending that pawn for the moment. Bishop f8. Now queen d5, stomping on that d file, stomping out the d2 possibility. Queen b8, black is very passive. Rook ba1, just preparing calmly. Rook a8, and there's some pinning implications here. Even if black takes on b6, well, there's rook a8, and there's a horrible pin which could be celebrated with bishop h6 in some lines as well. This f8 bishop is a problem. Rook d6, and here we see just the beautiful move rook a8. After rook takes d5, rook takes b8, rook takes b8, e takes d5, and this pin is really nasty. This pawn is immune because of this pin, rook a8. Just to quickly show you that, you know, rook takes there. That's how does black defend? And if king here, then rook takes, and this is a nice tactic, double attack, for example. So bishop d6, we see rook a6, threatening, for example, b7. Maybe, but no, there's something actually much even better than any direct threat like b7. b7 stopped anyway with rook b7, but here, this is the final move of the game, believe it or not. It's just an implication of the plan. The plan is shown. White just plays king f1, and the idea is just to march the king into the black position, or a6 if needed. Maybe king b5, rook a7, king a6, and it's black can't actually do much about this. Anytime he moves c4, that's protected, and then rook a7 is even more dangerous, and then b7. Kramnik had to resign, which means on the tie-break system, even though he's on exactly the same score as Magnus Carlsen, the first tie-break rule is the most wins. Magnus had collected just one more win than Vladimir Kramnik throughout this tournament. What a magnificent final round. Both the leaders collapsing in the end like warriors. Fantastic tournament to cover this tournament. I don't know about you guys, I think I've improved my understanding of psychology, chess, tension, that grandmasters are just human. The same sort of positions that seem comfortable maybe in our club games echo at the higher levels as well. King safety issues. It just really impressive tournament. I hope you've enjoyed all the game's commentary. We are going to look at this game in the second pass though. But what a fantastic win overall of the tournament by Magnus Carlsen. He was really pushed the edge, and he showed he was a warrior. He came back after being defeated by Vasily Ivanchuk to win that titanic struggle, and he's just collapsed in the final round. But then Vladimir Kramnik, with all the confusion and whether to go for a win or draw, hasn't played his top game, played this more experimental perk system. And the reaction from Vasily Ivanchuk, you know, Kasparov is quoted as saying, you know, on Kasparov's Facebook, would Ivanchuk be like the Joker or the hero? You know, would he like, I don't know, some speculation that he'd lose on time or something? But no, he played his A game against the top two of the tournament. He destroyed the top two players in the tournament, Vasily Ivanchuk, and losing on time against the other players, a lot of them. So my admiration for Vasily Ivanchuk is still very, very great. My admiration for Kramnik has gone up even further. My admiration for Magnus Carlsen has gone up even further. And also, of course, Peter Svitolin and Levon Aronian. They're only half a point away in the final scores. The person who got the most beaten up and the most humorous, if you look at the interviews on the official website, the most humorous about it is Radjabov saying, you know, it's difficult to play when there's loads of sharks and you're not playing your top game and everyone's after your blood in the shark infested pool. He's very, very humorous about his losses, and he's a great guy. He's won a new fan as well. I'm now a greater fan of Radjabov as well. What a fantastic tournament. And Boris Gelfand showing, you know, he's got great teeth as well. He can destroy these higher rated players than them just because they're higher rated. The rating system isn't the be all and end all. He's a really, really dangerous grandmaster, Boris Gelfand. So respect to every single participant in this tournament for making it a wonderful event to follow and comment on. Okay, let's go in the second pass though briefly. So what happened here? This very, very classical setup, seemingly totally unambitious, but it's preventative. It's preventing Black from doing some stuff in the centre. It's discouraging things. If Black tries e5 here, for example, let's just do a quick check, then simply d takes and there could be a nasty queen exchange. And how would Black's ambitions for trying to play for a win in this kind of forcing line be realised? It's just a small advantage for White. Black actually has to sack the exchange here or something, or lose the c-pawn. This kind of position is just very, very uncomfortable. White can control the d4 square and still id5 in this sort of position. The positional edge is clear here. So this is very uncomfortable for Black to try and play for a win against this particular setup. It echoes of the Avbok, bishop g5 in the King's Engine a little bit to me. So b5, a3. You know, White's got this nagging, quite a tight grip. If the computer evaluations had a measure of how the grip on this value is, how difficult it is to actually lessen, that would be very interesting as well as how easy the position to play is. The grip on that small plus is very, very tight here, in my view, because of the nature of the position, especially after d takes e5. Symmetrical pawn structure still, but White has a nagging edge. It's got more initiative on the d-file, more pressure to bear on the d-file, and more control over d4 than Black has over d5. So knight d4 was actually apparently the most practical try here. Just say offering h6, that could be taken, and Black's got some compensation. Is it in Kramnik style to do this? Let's go with this. What's happening here? Black's actually losing a pawn tactically because of the pressure here. And if you tried to support this, I think there's something wrong here with this. Queen c5. There's just pressure on that d file. So this idea of knight d4 is interesting. If that's the best practical try, that's not a good testament for the opening. There's probably other stuff as well, but apparently most commentators, I think, are agreed knight d4 is the way to go here. If we've tried rook d1 instead, okay, Black's got the option of taking on e2, and then if bishop takes h6 here, there's knight e4. And that should be okay for Black. If knight g3 here, bishop b7, then that should be okay for Black. Again, there's some compensation. So that was the way to go, it seems. Knight d4. But no, we see king h7 instead, and white has now, look at this evaluation, a clear advantage after Kramnik's king h7. A slightly questionable move, king h7, slightly on the passive side. So here, rook g8 is, I thought, interesting at the time. But no, a bit too caveman-y, I think. So rook e8 is more central. But even though technically the engines actually prefer rook g8, so white has this kind of dominating grip. b4 is actually liked by the engines. It fixes down basically b5 for a4 to be more effective. It's now a fixed target. Now there might be a potential threat of bishop takes h3, I imagine. If we play a casual move like queen b2, I would have thought, yeah, okay, maybe not. But anyway, okay, so queen e3, just keeping an eye on the centre, if nothing else, as well as the king side, the central d4 square. So white's got this grip on b5. He's now attacking on the queen side. So knight takes a4, bishop c4. White's advantage is really quite significant here. And in fact, there's a technical move in this position, bishop a7, which is of interest, just to a6 to block the protection. But rook a5 is also good. Actually, knight d5 as well. A lot of good moves for white. It's difficult for white to lose his advantage. He's got such a grip on the position. So rook a5. Now g3, very interesting move. Getting rid of some practical issues, like the d5 pressure. It evaporates now, from black's point of view. Netting that pawn, but there's pressure on black's king side. The king is encouraged to move here. Otherwise, doesn't want to really create weaknesses on this diagonal. Although f6 is prompted as well. f6 might be a viable alternative here. But the king moved, so some simplification. White still got the advantage even after the pawn sack. What is black actually threatening? Is it knight take? I think actually knight takes e4 is the threat potentially, and then f5 might be dangerous, might be. But against this is prophylaxis. Black can't use the f pawn with this bishop on that diagonal. So bishop takes d5, bishop takes d5. What else was there? It's a very difficult position. What is white actually threatening here? Knight e7 check is the threat. That's another reason to support e4 for knight e7 to be quite dangerous. So, you know, the black king can't go back on the h file, can't use f8. There's not too many options. So he takes on d5, giving white the bishop pair. Bishop drops back, allowing still the battery, only back one square. Queen c8. Queen b3. Okay, so here h5. White's better. Bishop e3. h5 is a little bit controversial. I think is knight e6 playable straight off the bat. Bishop e3. White's still a little bit better. Black's not really doing much here, and this a6 pawn is being victimized soon. Surely white is just threatening. Something like rook h a1 is one of the threats. So, okay, h5 trying to do something on the king side, but it's not such a big deal, as Ivanchuk's contempt for this king side attack is shown with this rook doubling now with its partner rook. Not worried about h4. This is just taken. Queen d8, and now just rook takes a6. Not worried at all about queen takes h4 in any line. So let's see, for example, takes, queen takes h4. We can simply take on c6 apparently. If knight f4 check is not that convincing, we just take. Now we can't take with a pawn, surely. Bishop f7 no good here because of this queen g3 resource. That should be equal, but no, white has in this position crushing blow. Rook takes g6. This extinguishes black's attack. And if rook d8, queen c3 to extinguish d2, and this is all over. White's now threatening, well, queen g7 mate is the one, as well as stopping d2. So this shows this attack is not really a solid attack. It's a straw man's attack. So rook c8 is not the best move, though. It's slightly questionable. Best was actually apparently taking after rook takes c6. Check. Now in this position, actually queen takes f4, so not going for anything like that. So queen takes f4, queen d3. Okay, actually here now, bishop f6, black's threatening bishop h4, king g7, and preventing rook g6. This seems okay for a moment. Interesting. So here, in the line which that would be disastrous, e takes f4, trying to get to g3 like this. But actually, this position is apparently not so bad. Let's go with rook takes g6, rook d8. There's a little bit of counterplay. There's counterplay here. Okay, so maybe Vladimir's h5 attack isn't so bad in this respect. Changing the evaluation here, that he can go for queen takes f4, which supports bishop f6, which supports king g7 potentially. Okay, so in the game continuation though, he blundered, I think, again with rook c8. Okay, just restarting the engine briefly. The engine had a breakdown on this poxy computer. So, okay, rook c8 is just clarifying things completely. Instead of queen takes h4, that was sorry, rook takes and then queen takes h4 was black's best chance apparently for knight f4 and queen takes f4. But this now allows that knight, that pesky knight, to be eliminated, potentially with bishop e6. But for the moment, actually, rook h1 was played as well, which is still strong. Maybe not technically the most accurate, but still pretty strong enough to win this game. Rook c7, so black's got no prospects now. This knight is eliminated, and now this b5. This is really nasty. There's a little cheapo as well set, you know, bishop b6. We just played check. And that would be annoying, to say the least. Okay, a little bit annoying. So just keeping control, b5, and now huge pawn. If taking here, I think this is just a disaster with rook e6. Let's have a quick look at this position. Queen takes g6. It's horrendous. Surely h5 now on the cards. Horrendous. d2 under control, so it's one less evil all the other, so it's the b pawn. And okay, here rook b1, bishop f8, better rook d6, trying for rook d2, last chance saloon. White's still better here, I would believe. Queen b5, if check, we can just take king h3 to avoid any checks on f4. White's just better. He's controlling the position. There's no real attack there. So in the game continuation, it was made quite easy now. Soon after rook d6, rook a8, simplification to a completely won endgame position where the king, after king f1, is indicating its intention just to march up the board. Okay, so just to echo again, congratulations on my previous comments, congratulations to Magnus Carlsen and to all participants who made this a thoroughly enjoyable tournament for everyone to watch. Okay, Hope you enjoyed my coverage. Might do some extra highlights in the next few days of key positions. And okay, comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.